Wall Street Journal, and he is called as a Indiana Jones of branding, and he's gonna hold a lecture, which name you can see on the screen.
All right, let's just get into it. Or maybe not. Which button do I push?
There's just two buttons there.
Right.
Куда надо жать? Вот. Еще раз. Ага. Окей. Seems now it's working. Uh-huh. This one. This one.
Okay, the one that's been rubbed off by repeated use. All right. I'd like to start off my presentation the way that a lot of people end theirs, because at this point you're putting your faith in me that I'm going to have something worth saying. So I thank you for that in advance. When I go to conferences, there seems to be confusion a lot of times about where I'm from, whether I'm British or American, and the answer is I'm both. I have an American passport, having grown up in California and lived in the US most of my life, and I have a hint of a British accent from having lived in Britain for the last 12 years. My company is called JH & Co, and we are an interdisciplinary identity consultancy and creative force of nature, which is a overly fancy way of saying we work in unconventional ways. The way that I think of things, strategy isn't a separate thing. A lot of branding programs start out with strategy phase and then they go on to other things, and I don't like that. Strategy isn't separate, it's embedded throughout. What do? We invent imaginative and tactical PR stunts. I'll show you some examples of those. We envision and deliver high quality promotional films. There's one of those in there too. We specialize in high quality words, copywriting, slogans, naming, and we do logos if we have to. I'm a bit like the house burglar turned security consultant phenomenon that you have in the United States, where I used to work for a design agency and spend a lot of years selling design to places as a place branding technique. And I now consult two places, advising them not to hire design agencies to give them logos. But a good logo is a good thing. It's a very nuanced perspective that I have. Our clients are anyone brave enough to hire us. It's companies, big and small, governments, associations, individuals, armies, even we've worked for. And I think this diversity of clients gives us a deep perspective, an understanding of all of the stakeholders. A place is not such a singular thing like a corporation, and so when you do branding with places, it's 90% different than if you would do branding for a company. They introduced me as a journalist. I do write regularly for the Wall Street Journal, mostly travel articles and culture pieces. A book I wrote was translated into 7 languages called Brand America. And as he mentioned, I have been called the Indiana Jones of branding. But I'm also intellectually honest. I'm just posing on that bike. I did not actually ride it, but I did get all the way out to the middle of the Gobi Desert where that bike was sitting. I tend to roll up my sleeves and get more involved. I'm not an armchair consultant. I get my hands dirty. And if you want to never be boring or bored, then work with us. Having said that, I'll be boring for just a second and talk about brand. Let's go back to the definition. It gets thrown around a lot. The word brand originates from the old Scandinavian term for fire, which is why if you go to Stockholm, where I took this photograph, you see the brand station in every few blocks. It then evolved into this way of heating up an iron and marking your territory, stamping your animal, identifying your property, putting your name on something. And it is still that. A brand is still that. That is the brand identity. The brand, though, is more usefully thought of as in people's minds. When you're working on your brand, yeah, you can work on the brand identity, but what you really want to affect is what's in someone else's head. So to be branded is to be known, regarded, appreciated, understood, valued, trusted, liked and loved even, and identified with in some ways. Studies show, they put these caps on people with all these, it's called fMRI, and the same parts of your brain light up when you're dealing with a brand that you like as light up when you're thinking about a friend that you like. Mentally, brands and friends occupy similar territories. I once came up on the back of a cocktail napkin with a very simple model of brand strength. I think some brands are strong because they're famous, others are strong because they're loved. There's a misconception nowadays amongst places and cities especially that their brand is only good if they're famous. It wouldn't matter sort of how loved they are locally. If they're not sort of famous internationally, they're a bit anxious, not quite happy about that. I counsel my clients against that sort of thinking. Brand is a dualistic concept. It's substance plus feeling. It's reality plus image, truth plus imagination, fact plus impression, black screens. What? Did I press the wrong button or? This will let the translators catch up anyway, so. How many of you are, actually, I don't see too many with the headphones. How many of you are listening to me in English? Oh, great. Okay, that makes me feel better. Thanks. Okay. I know how hard it is to listen to the translation. It's very mentally taxing. Yeah. Meanwhile, back in the brands. So a valid branding approach has to take account of both of these sides of things. That's what makes it robust and honest. Now, a couple of case studies. Vilnius, Lithuania, you've probably heard of, part of the former Soviet Union. That's the mayor of Vilnius. You might remember him from a few years ago where he drove a tank over some cars parked in the old town of Vilnius in order to demonstrate his seriousness about the new parking enforcement regulations. So he's a bit of a showman. He came to me via a local advertising agency that he was working with because they wanted a new logo for the city to put on trash trucks. They had a formal crest and they needed something simple. And we came up with this castle, which is a sort of visual symbol of, there's a castle in Vilnius. Oh, we're back. But I went much further with it, and our goal became to amplify and intensify Vilnius' identity through graphic design, films, actions, and policy changes. We started by thinking about what makes Vilnius Vilnius. Whatever city you're dealing with or place, there's a set of traits. It's not usually one unique thing, but a set of things that makes a given place that place rather than some other place. And our job was to identify the most positive of these, in Vilnius' case, and amplify and intensify them. If you're making notes, right, amplify, intensify as goals of branding. The organizing principle or theme for the program was Vilnius Logic. Vilnius Logic is kind of summarized by this kind of wonderful bohemian weirdness to Vilnius. If you've ever been there, you see it around the place. An example of it would be at the time that they gained their independence in the early 90s, they were tearing up the statues of Vladimir Lenin and installing statues of Frank Zappa. In most places this would be strange, but in Vilnius, according to Vilnius Logic, nothing strange about that. So we called that Vilnius logic. It became the organizing theme of the. Vilnius, Lithuania's bohemian atmosphere makes the city both livable and quirky. The unity of art and life is the city's urban philosophy. In Vilnius, a dog has a right to be a dog. And the lines are blurred between the medieval and the avant-garde, the decorative and the practical. This philosophy is also known as Fluxus, which began as a worldwide art movement started by Lithuanians in the 1960s. John Lennon and Yoko Ono met at a Fluxus exhibition in New York. A typical Flux piece is a kind of performance art that exalts the mundane. For example, observe a sign indicating a direction of travel, travel in that direction, and another one. Speaking of travel, at Vilnius's charming airport, we decided to perform a Flux piece. Our simple idea was to take a 1969 vintage fruit crate and put a sign on it saying "Help yourself" in several languages. And with the enthusiastic cooperation of airport security, we put the crate onto the baggage carousel. We got our cameras ready and waited for passengers to arrive to see how they would respond. Watch this guy's eyebrows.
What do you think of the experiment? Good.
Our successful experiment took an authentic element of the city's character and made it tangible to arriving visitors. All it took was fruit and Fluxus. Uh-oh. Wait a minute. I hope that doesn't start playing because it's loud and obnoxious dance music. So we with this Fluxus piece at the airport, it was just a simple thing, basically free. I mean, how much does it cost to refill apples in a crate? But it was a way of, it uses the logical, not the logical fallacy, but forget the term, but of priming. When people come, you have a captive audience, they're waiting for the luggage, and then they see this, and then when they get this idea that there's some weirdness about the place, then they're more apt to see it when they're there. So it's a kind of gentle introduction. Another thing we did was make a film. So there are these guys called street gymnasts. It's a bit like parkour where they're running and jumping, but a little more static. And there were some very famous ones in Vilnius. And they would make their own homemade videos, which got a lot of views on YouTube. But it didn't look good. They weren't high quality, and they were shot in the yards behind apartment blocks, which were common, in all the former Soviet Union. But it didn't actually give a very accurate impression of Vilnius. So these were the videos that they made. I'll show you a snippet of that, and then I'll show you the one that we made using the same guys, but that showed Vilnius in a better light. Maybe.
I can remember days, things weren't always this way. I used to make you smile, if only for a while. But now you can't get through, there's no way I can lose. I know some days are hard, but don't you make mine too. I can remember days, things weren't always this way. I used to make you smile, if only for a while. But now you can't get through, there's no way you can lose. I know some days are hard, but don't you make mine too. 'Cause I can't stand it when you come home and we just fight for hours.
So we used the fact that people would watch a video of that. No one cares about Vilnius. They're not going to watch a tourism video about Vilnius. But they'll watch something about those guys, and Vilnius rides the coattails. So here's the film we made. So the mayor asked for a logo, and he got a bit more than he bargained for. He also got policy recommendations. That's what I'm talking about when I mean robust branding. It can't just be communications, even if it's halfway decent communications. So, for instance, Vilnius has some of the cleanest tap water in Europe. So in order to increase awareness of this, we said you should enact an ordinance, enact a law to require restaurants in Vilnius to offer tap water to customers rather than just selling them bottled water. And since Vilnius has among the fastest data speeds in the world, you have to forbid Vilnius-based internet service providers from throttling the data speeds so that paying customers can feel the speed, and the city can develop a reputation for this speed, which is noticeable when you have full access to it. And a couple of other things. For instance, I worked for the governor of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil for a little while way back when, and learned that Rio de Janeiro claims to have the largest urban forest in the world, but actually the one in Vilnius, if they just designated it as an urban forest, is twice the size of Rio's. So we suggested that they should establish Vilnius as home to the largest urban forest in the world, and then enable it with free Wi-Fi, go the extra mile, and that'll symbolize Lithuanians' bond with nature, help establish Vilnius as city in a forest, which was one of the mayor's strategic ambitions, and make headlines, because Vilnius will then overtake Rio de Janeiro as home to the largest urban forest in the world. We recommended installing lasers, like a laser sculpture installation in the river, as a visual reminder of Vilnius's technical prowess. Something like half of all the colored lasers in the world include parts that come from Vilnius region. But people forget about this. So this is reminders. This is amplify and intensify. And because this program is robust, aiming to amplify and intensify what is already authentically there, over time that means that an emotionally meaningful and economically valuable brand or reputation or sense of Vilnius can emerge. I hear these overheads announcements. I feel like I might be missing my plane or something, telling me I need to get to the gate. I'll let that one. It's the red zone. No parking in the red zone. The white zone is for loading and unloading only. Okay. London's tourism board. Now this is a brand identity, corporate identity. So logo and slogan type thing for the tourist board of Europe's largest city. We came up with Visit London, established 50 AD, like an old store, right? And it's nice because the thing about London that's unique, really, is that it's so ancient, and yeah, it's completely vital. It's totally up to the minute at the same time. If you go to a place like Vienna, I find it a little bit uncomfortable because it feels half empty, and it's so clear that its best days were like 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Whereas London is not like that. It's ancient and modern. So this was a way to get that across. We changed that fact line, but we had very, very distinct criteria for it. It had to be interesting or relevant, had to be expressive of something surprising, important, or underappreciated about London, and be either witty or bold. So there were a bunch of them. GMT +0, highlighting that London is the center of the world in a way. Black cabs in 12 colors. 31 tailors on Savile Row. Greenest big city in the world. 300 languages spoken, which is true. 300 languages are spoken every day in London. They redid their stands for events like this out of that. And my favorite slogan of this was one that I came up with, which was Visit London, it rains more in Rome, which, as Henry Kissinger said about something else in another context, has the added benefit of being true. You can look up the statistics and it does rain more in Rome. You might ask legitimately, how robust is that? I've just been arguing that branding needs to be robust for places. How robust is that? My answer is that London is London and can break some of the rules. One of my recent projects was, I think I'm the only consultant that I'm aware of who did a branding project for an entire continent, which is basically an impossible task. But just because it's impossible doesn't mean there aren't some benefits to attempting it. The client was the the Association of Trade Promotion Agencies for all of the Latin American countries. And the brief was to brand the whole continent from Tijuana to Tierra del Fuego. We did it by boiling, I did a lot of consultation with them, and we boiled the whole continent down to 4 themes, which, like I said, is ridiculous. And part of good branding work is knowing how ridiculous what you're trying to do is, and doing it anyway. If you hold on too tightly, or imagine that you can get this right, you lose it. That sounds very zen, but that's how it is. Openness, flavorfulness, footballness, and okayness were our handles for the themes. If you want to know the details, you can go back and play this. Each one spoke to an important part of what you would expect to find in Latin America if you didn't really know the place. It was a sort of a lesson in half a page of what Latin America was like. And we then decided to make 4 economist adverts. You've all seen these country advertising in Economist. It's usually really boring and quotes some statistics about growth rates, and have the seal of the commissioning ministry in much larger than it needs to be or that anyone cares about. We decided that Latin America has this vibrancy. The thing above all, Latin America should not be dull. And so I hired a designer from Rio de Janeiro, a Carioca woman living in London, and she had these big ideas about the light and the energy, and she embodied that visually. And we came up with these 4 slogans: Latin America, the world in one continent; Latin America, measurable exuberance; Latin America, never a dull moment; and Latin America, always a great story. And illustrated these with a poster each. I think in the interest of time, I'll skip the details and just let the visual impact be made. You can imagine picking up a copy of The Economist, and the way they do these ad buys, they'll have 4 slots, and every 10 pages you get another one in that same campaign. So you imagine flipping through a copy of The Economist that has these ads in it. It makes a hell of a lot stronger impression than the usual, invest in Georgia or invest in Lower Silesia, which are actual ones. I love Georgia. I don't want to put down Georgia. I guess the moral of that story is that sometimes the job of branding is just to plant the seed. A lot of times with branding programs, they try to do too much, try to please everybody, and just drop the ball. A quick run through this idea of provenance and brands being from places. The big part of brands is to help us make quick decisions in a world of chaotic and too much information. And one of the heuristics that we use is where something's from. We make a quick judgment. This is now extending to cities. But of course it started with countries and societies and cultures. So Häagen-Dazs, which was invented in New York City, masquerades as an upscale kind of Scandinavian thing. And in fact uses letter combinations that don't even exist in Scandinavian languages. That A with the dots never comes next to an A without it's completely invented, but it fooled Americans for decades, and nobody cares. That's the other thing about brands, is a good branding kind of magic is one that has the audience enjoying being in on it, and isn't it's a kind of a white lie, not that people like. Rather than a mistrust-inducing kind of a lie. Comme des Garçons is, sounds French, but it's Japanese, 100% Japanese fashion brand. A lot of this happens in fashion. Massimo Dutti is Spanish. It came at a time, there's a lot about confidence in brands. And the lesson of confidence in this case is that Massimo Dutti, which is or was owned by Inditex, I think they're the ones who have Zara or Mango or both, came up with this brand at a time when Spain was not confident about itself as a place of origin for fashion. And so they thought that they'd be better off introducing a mainstream fashion brand to pretend that it was Italian, and that's what they did. But they wouldn't do that now, and they're not doing it now. And an example of this, which I don't think they've taken as far as they could have, but it did start to happen, which was Mango made a deal with the Barcelona City Council to mention their Barcelonan origins on their shopping bags. Make the most of origin. I think that clever and fundamentally honest branding can make a virtue of place of origin even when that seems impossible. A few years ago, I was working for a branding agency, and the number 2 tire company in India came to us with the plan to enter the European market, beginning in Germany. They were figuring that they would downplay their Indian origins, almost kind of like hide where they're from, and sell at a deep discount. I didn't like this. One, because I'm a businessman, and selling anything at a deep discount as your first idea is not good. And second of all, as a kind of humanist and globalist, I don't think you should be ashamed of where you're from. And third of all, I think that there was brand equity in India. India was a lot more famous and well known than Apollo tires. So maybe Apollo could steal some brand equity from India. And I sat down and thought about it, and I came back to them, having thought, well, what do I know? I haven't been to India, actually. What do I know about India that could be relevant to tires? I just closed my eyes and let images of India come to me, and this one came to me, as it might well come to many of you. And I went back to the client and I said, well, why don't you make the claim, Apollo's tires are made for the worst roads and the worst drivers on planet Earth, so they're definitely good enough for a German taxi or a British lorry. And they were kind of stunned. They weren't expecting that, but they thought about it, and they came back and said, yeah, you know what, we're actually more comfortable owning our Indianness and doing a kind of judo move to make that a virtue. They embraced their Indianness. They adopted an Indian color palette in the design route that we put forward for them, and they came up with a slogan. I didn't write it. Where the Silk Road meets the Autobahn. So great labeling can be magical, I think. Example. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'll just keep going until they give me the hook. Cashmere from Mongolia. Mongolia, which was ostensibly part of the Soviet Union, it feels very Soviet. If you're there, you would recognize the feel of the place. They speak Russian. Their language is written in Cyrillic. Just by the way, Mongolia produces about 40% of the world's cashmere. China produces 50%. So if you buy a sweater made out of cashmere, the odds are good for technical reasons to do with the length of the fiber and the thickness of the fiber, that it combines both Chinese and Mongolian fibers. The trick to having good cashmere is to have a really cold goat. And there's no place really in the world that has goats that's colder than Mongolia. And it has this mystique as well of the epitome of a faraway exotic place. It's a nifty place of origin. It's theoretically sexy. And it's fascinating. A third of Mongolians are nomadic animal herders. And they live this very unique and vulnerable life out in the middle of nowhere. Mongolia has the lowest population density of any country in the world. So almost everybody is in the middle of nowhere there, except in the big city. And yet, if you buy a sweater in J. Crew in Santa Monica, California, where I took this picture, it says Italian cashmere, which means it was knitted in Italy. There really aren't any goats in Italy. It says New York, New York, and it says made in China in the smallest legally acceptable typeface. But nowhere in there is Mongolia mentioned. Mongolia was just not getting enough credit in this scene. So I came in as part of a larger project. I spent 6 months there, starting in September 2011, and together with my team we devised this ingredient brand strategy, kind of like the Intel inside is roughly like that. We wanted to come up with a kind of Mongolia inside, but a much sexier version of it. And I always, you know me already, after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however we're talking, I'm into authenticity. So I found Mongolia's greatest living calligrapher down some back alley with a guide, and spent some time with him to get him to play with mark. It's got him to design the mark for this thing. And then I hired a Danish design studio to turn it into a labeling system. And that's what we came up with, certified Mongolian noble fiber. And that word, that roundel is actually a word. It means Khan, like Genghis Khan, like king. And you look at it and you don't know what it is. You're like, I don't know what that is, because you don't know what, nobody knows what Mongolian stuff looks like. But you know that it's not Arabic, you know that it's not Chinese, and it has it's very eye-catching, and it would fit on the most high-end kind of product that you could put it on. We did a whole labeling thing. We used photography that was completely new. Most of the way they had portrayed their products was with local people standing next to camels, wearing their products. Instead, we took a guy who was quite fashionable with a beard. You can't see it in this picture, but a bearded, hipster, Vogue-looking guy, and photographed him on Malibu Beach with a yak blanket from Mongolia on his shoulders. Overall, the project results are a new brand platform for reintroducing the best of Mongolian exotic fiber to the world market, and larger than that, a strong strategy which is coherent with and supportive of larger national goals, like the sustainable development of Mongolia's nomadic culture and the diversification of Mongolia's economy away from mining, upon which it is otherwise entirely dependent. Honest signals. This is almost the end of the presentation. I like to pull concepts from one area of life and bring them somewhere else. It's kind of how my mind naturally works. I picked up this idea of honest signals from evolutionary biology, where an honest signal is an unfakeable communication of fitness. So, for example, this animal called a springbok, which runs around on the African savanna, if it can jump up like that, if it's healthy enough to do that, it will do it, because it's an unfakeable signal to any lion waiting in the shade. Don't even try to run after me, because you won't catch me. So the lion goes, oh, okay, not that one. I'll keep napping. It's an unfakeable signal. Now, this unfakeable signals also happen in the human world. For example, men taking physical risks being attractive to women. It says, because it projects fitness, it says, I do this and yet I'm still alive, which proves that I'm brave and competent. And you can't fake winning the F1 at Monaco. The only way to win the F1 at Monaco is to get in the car. First you have to do all the thing and get the job of getting in the car. You got to get in the car, and you got to drive around it, and you have to win it. So there's no messing around with that. The best branding of places and otherwise happens when honest signals emerge. Example of this is Brazil. I don't actually know that this panned out. This slide I put into the deck a couple of years ago, and I don't know if this deal came to fruition or it fell through, but it was about to happen at one point, where iPads were going to be made in Brazil, which is great branding for Brazil, because it says that Apple, the world's largest and arguably most competent and cutting-edge company, has chosen us, this country, Brazil, as up to standard to make their flagship product. That's unfakeable, because Apple could choose other countries. To put it as a branding principle. The less bullshitting you do, the better your marketing and branding will be. It's very tempting sometimes to avoid this principle, but this is an important principle. So when I work with clients, you know, it starts out, we design the programs, the engagements in different ways, but it's about looking at, you know, is the branding approach that you're taking robust enough? What tweaks can be made? Are there little things that can be done? And what rules can you break? Just like London can break some rules because it's London, most places have certain things kind of made in the shade and they can take certain liberties. Every case is different. Best practice is a very strange concept when applied to corporate branding. It's ridiculous when applied to something as multi-dimensional as a place. But that's kind of how I look at things. Just to show what I'm kind of working on now, if anyone happens to be interested in these things specifically. With some colleagues, we've developed the world's first augmented virtual reality app. It's kind of a big thing now, or it's about to be when Oculus splashes down, where you can use your phone and put it in a piece of cardboard. Google actually has an app called Google Cardboard, which uses it. It's a bit like the old. You guys look younger than me, but I think these are still around. When I was a kid, we had these ViewMasters, and you put these in, and you click through, and you could see 3D pictures of San Francisco, and you could kind of tour a place virtually, and it sparked your imagination and kind of made you want to go there when you were old enough. And I had this kind of childlike wonder. So I was inspired by that, and also inspired by London's Street Museum app, which they released, the Museum of London released quite a while ago now. But if you're in London, you can load this up, and in certain spots around London, you can hold up your phone. You don't need any goggles, and it will superimpose old black and white photographs of London onto exactly what you're looking at right in front of you. And it's kind of neat. It doesn't work very well because of the GPS. Stuff doesn't align so correctly. But I got these guys together, and we figured out a way of creating this app that would let you put on these goggles. So this is a town square in Europe. So you could imagine someone in the comfort of their living room looking at this town square, kind of clicking through pictures of, like the ViewMaster. But then we had the idea to augment it. So the augmented virtual reality would be the part where you can look down and look back up again, and then suddenly there's a pirate ship in the middle of the town square, or maybe there's a 747 coming in for a landing right over your head, something like that. And it's a gimmick, but it's a good gimmick, and we're developing that now. The other thing I'm really working on hard, I go to Iceland a lot. We're coming up with a platform to do what we're calling, in a grandiose kind of way, to restore the soul of travel. I was late to traveling. I didn't get a passport till I was 27. I'm 42 now, and I've been to 75 countries. So I've seen a bit of the world, and I've traveled in the way that only modern life is made capable of, and it's fantastic, and I love traveling. But I think that, as a colleague of mine put it, Lonely Planet is making the planet lonely a little bit. People travel around with their nose in guidebooks, they're kind of checking things off, and they're more concerned with opening hours than with opening themselves up to the experience of traveling. And we consume travel so easy. You book the ticket and you get the ticket on your phone. We travel like we consume fast food, and we just have to be careful. You know, the fast food has a place, but if all we ate is fast food, it's not good. And so if all we travel is in a fast food way, it's not good. So my business partners and I want to put humanity and adventure back into travel for visitors and locals. In a big city like Moscow, you don't notice all the tourists, but in smaller places like Iceland, you know, where they have 300,000 people and 2 million tourists, they feel overrun. You know, it's oppressive, all of these people coming through taking pictures of the scenery. So to get locals participating in the idea of being visited and the pleasure of being visited by foreigners is really worth doing. So we have a mobile platform already in development for 2 years now, which some people who've seen it have described it as kind of like an Airbnb for time, and it allows locals to create paid tourist attractions entrepreneurially and to meet visitors who are interested in meeting them. And if this works, the result is that everyone gets a richer and a more, in a way, old-fashioned experience of travel. And we will launch in Iceland first, and we're looking for future markets. So that's something that I like talking about and I like presenting. I'm very accessible. You can write to me directly. You can phone me up or send me WhatsApp messages. If you are interested in, I don't know, let's give me a shout. Let's start a conversation. I hope this was helpful to people.
Уважаемые друзья, если вопросы...
Dear friends, do you have questions except myself? Please raise your hands. Very nice.
Your lecture, that was really interesting to hear for me. My question is, you showed us a few posters that you've projected for Latin America, and as an example of the exhibition, you suggested that it could be placed in a big magazine like Economist, for example. As a person who has never been in Latin America and who's not that much immersed in the culture, for me, if I do not read what is written on it, it doesn't really sparkle an association with Latin America directly. So the question would be, relating to all the other city or country branding projects that you've done, how high is the chance of jumping over your head while doing that? Like maybe going a bit too forward in terms of branding a country that hasn't, for example, achieved that level of technology, and that level of technology, for example, is not known around the world.
Can you summarize? I'm not sure how to add. It was a bunch of things in one. Can you help me parse that?
So, for example, if you do a branding for a city or a country, and you try to make it look modern and to use what they have, as you said, to amplify what they have, how high is the chance that in your trial of doing the best for it, you overachieve, and the picture of the country you draw is something that we haven't achieved at the moment?
Okay. I think the question is, what are the dangers of being so successful in your portrayal of the place in some way that's not quite true enough that when people have the experience of the place, they'll feel let down. Is that what you're... I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, when I was working with the Mongolians, their first priority, I thought very wrongly, was to register the trademark. I mean, why not? You know, we made the design. You register it with the proper intellectual property rights authorities and propagate that throughout the world. But they were worried that the Chinese. Their first concern was that the Chinese might copy the. They hate the Chinese. And the first concern was the Chinese would copy the logo. And I said, okay, your first concern should be making a product, outstanding enough to be worthy of this beautiful thing that I was a bit arrogant about it. Make something great, and then worry about defending the intellectual property of it. But in the meanwhile, if the Chinese aren't stupid. If you notice the Chinese have copied this logo and they're using it, the first thing you should do is crack open a bottle of champagne and celebrate, because you've created something worthwhile. Because the Chinese won't copy something that's broken. That's an answer to a little bit different question than the one you asked, but hopefully sheds light on a similar territory. I guess, sorry, I just thought of another way of answering that. There's a old marketing adage about putting lipstick on a pig. I think you really can't put lipstick on a pig. I mean, no one's fooled, so you don't have to worry about that being a problem.
My name is Brian Yuan. I'm actually used to work for The Economist on the ad unit. So I want to figure out why did you choose The Economist to begin with? And also, like nowadays, actually social media is getting big. So what kind of opportunity do you see from the digital world for city to do their branding? That's my question. Thank you.
So it's the first question is, why did we choose The Economist? We chose The Economist because if they were actually going to do one of the conventional things that people do when they have a budget to spend on advertising and they want to think that spending the money on advertising is doing branding, that was a decent one for that context. It's very limited what you could do with communicating about a whole continent. So I thought that as advertising went, that would be a quite striking and respectable way to do it. And that people investing in Latin America, an investment decision is a serious thing. It's not where do we take our next vacation. So you're not going to persuade somebody about that, but you might shade things a little bit with it. So that it seemed a reasonable platform for that, a reasonable canvas for that kind of a shading. About digital, what's a good way to do digital? I'm too old to be like exactly a social media, like it's not second nature to me. I have some issues with this. What I notice now is a kind of tyranny of click-throughs and page views, and something successful if lots of people saw it, or that doesn't feel quite right to me. It seems like everybody wants to be famous. Cities want to be like the Kim Kardashian of, they don't feel good about themselves if they're not, world famous, and that sounds neurotic to me. But there are some good examples. I don't want to dodge the question. There are some good examples of digital. But most of them have to do with something authentic. They're not like think up of a clever hashtag. They're like I wish I could think of one. As soon as we shut the camera down and turn off the mic, it'll come to me. But there are some places that do that well, and there's always a strain of authenticity and vulnerability, like a kind of risk taking. A lot of communication that's official is bad because the places don't want to make themselves vulnerable. They don't want to show any underbelly, and that's almost always boring.
Yeah. In Russia, we have some projects about renovation cities, especially depressive cities on the north. And often people don't understand why we are spending money to branding. They don't know even the word branding. Why we not spending money for salary, including salary or something like this. How to explain people why we are trying to renovate and to make branding in these cities?
I think that people think, why should we spend money on branding, shows they're right to think that because what they're being shown as branding is mostly kind of stupid and ineffective. The thing about brand, it's hard for people to understand it, but you can't really do the branding yourself. You can only do some things to invite the brand to emerge in other people's minds that you hope will. So it's a negotiation, and your part is just to do the best you can so that other people can pick up their side of the dialogue. That sounds very abstruse. Okay, the only way I can answer that is with a story from university. I said as I grew up in Los Angeles. It snowed in 1953 in Los Angeles, but when I moved to Philadelphia, there was snow in the wintertime. And outside of my dormitory, there was a field, and people would do this thing when it snowed where they'd have snowball fights, and they'd start to make a snowball and then make it bigger. You probably do this in Russia. You got lots of snow. And then soon you have like 20 people, 50 people pushing this gigantic, like 3-4 meter big snowball around the field. And as that would happen, people would look out the windows from the dorm and see this, and they would put on their shoes and come down and help out. They could understand what was happening. I use this as an analogy. I think that the way to start branding projects is like starting that snowball. You start to do something that people can see, and they go, okay, I know what that is. I know how to join that. I know my role in that. I like where this is going. Great, let's do it. And if the two guys that started that snowball, if they had first come into the dormitory with a clipboard and said, okay, at 5 o'clock we're going to meet and make a giant snowball, and we need 50 people, sign up here, the snowball never would have got made. And that's how a lot of branding programs work, is they try to do the sign up and get everybody excited before something really starts to happen. So I always advocate, start doing something so that people can see it, get it, and then they want to be part of it, and they join in. There's always a conflict, though, between the projection of the place, the city, let's say, how that's portrayed to outsiders versus how it's understood by insiders. And so if you show the foreign, people don't always, the locals don't always recognize themselves in the portrayal that's going out to potential visitors. And that's a tricky thing. I do have some ways of solving that, but it doesn't lend itself to sound bites. But if you want to talk more about that and you've got an hour, we can sit and go through it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
The last one question, please. Okay.
Do you like the logo of the Moscow Urban Forum? Yeah, this one.
Well, yeah. I mean, what difference does it make? I like it, but I'm not really a logo critic. If someone writes to me, I'll send you my article on the joy. It's called "The Joys and Sorrows of Logos and Slogans in Place Branding," which I wrote for the Journal of Place Branding. But I think you need, as I say in that article, a company needs letterhead. My company has a little logo. I mean, you need a logo, and you need some graphic design, and it might as well be pretty decent. And to my way of looking at it, I think this does the trick. One of the standards often people worry about, but one of the standards for graphic design and brand identity is given the context, is it good enough? Not everything has to be some award-winning. The forum happens every year, but it's not the same as something on the tail fin of an airplane or on a product of a company that's going to be around for a century if they're lucky, where that kind of instant recognition out of the corner of your eye is valuable. You don't need that to have that standard for that logo. So I think it works just fine.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Pleasure. Thank you.